Hi everyone, so in this video I'm going to go over your review sheet. So the first question says 25.3% of the polar bear population is over 20 years old, 58.4% of the population is female, and these two events are independent of each other. What's the probability that the randomly selected polar bear will be over 20 years old and female? So right here I see the word "and," which means that I can multiply only if the events are independent, and they tell me that right there. If the events are independent, you can multiply the probabilities. Now, before you do anything, make sure you change these to decimal. You got to move these decimal places over twice. Okay, so when you do that, you're going to be ending up multiplying the probability of 0.253 times the probability of 0.584, which will get you about 0.1477, and they want nearest percent, so I move this over twice, but that rounds to 15%. The next question says a bag of candy contains 5 red Skittles, 8 yellow Skittles, and 6 purple Skittles. Okay, so without looking, you select a Skittle at random, you eat it. Now this eat it thing is really important because that means you're not putting it back in the bag. Then you select the second Skittle. What's the probability that the first Skittle you choose is purple and the second is red? Well, if I choose a purple Skittle, that's 6 out of how many in total? 5 plus 8 plus 6 gets you 19. You want and a second Skittle, so you're going to multiply because we see the word and. The second Skittle is going to be red. How many reds are there? 5. But remember, you ate one of the Skittles, so there's not 19 in the bag anymore. There are 18 in the bag. That'll multiply to 30 over 342. The next question says the scoring results of an IQ test are normally distributed. The mean is 89 and the standard deviation is 7.1. What's the percent of students taking the test that scored between 65 and 87? So the first thing is that this is normally distributed, which means that you have a bell curve. The mean is 89, so I can put that in the middle. They say the standard deviation is 7.1, which is important. They want the percent of students between 65 and 87. That means you want to find between, hold on, let me write with not the highlighter, 65 and 87. You want to find this area. And to do that, you're going to use the normal CDF command in your calculator. So to do this in your calculator, what you're going to do is you're going to go, this is the Graph Calc 83 that I had posted on your Google Classroom. If you don't have this one, it's really useful because it has all the features you need. So the first thing I did was I pressed second vars, and it got me here. And then you'll see normal CDF, this guy right here. You're going to choose that. Then you're going to choose that, and you're going to type in this. So you're going to put in 65, which is the lower bound, 87, which is the upper, 89, which is the mean, and 7.1, which is the standard deviation. To do that, you're going to have to use the commas. So the comma is right here. So I did second vars, I chose normal CDF, and then I did 65, comma, 87, comma, 89, comma, and 7.1, comma. And then I got 38.87, and they're asking you what percent, so I'm going to say 38.87%. All right, the next question says, if 15% of the U.S. homes have solar power and 62% of the U.S. homes have at least one vehicle and 93% have solar power and own at least one vehicle, what's the probability of having solar power or owning at least one vehicle? So that means we're going to have to use the OR formula, which means we add the two probabilities and we subtract the overlap, so the and of both. So the probability of having solar power, we're going to change it to a decimal, it's 0.15, plus the probability of having at least one vehicle is 0.62, subtract that overlap, 0.093, remember to change everything to decimals, and you're going to get 0.677. They have everything in percents, so I'm just going to change this to 67.7% just to be uniform with the problem. So they say, using the same scenario from question 4, what's the probability of having a solar power given we have at least one vehicle? So given, remember, you do the and, so you have the and probability, which is both of them, divided by the second one, the probability of just at least one vehicle. So it's always both on top for given, and whatever is after the given goes on the bottom. So I'm going to put solar power, which is 0.15 over, solar power and vehicle. That was silly. That is 0.093. And you're going to divide that by 0.62, and that ends up getting you 0.15. And again, being uniform with the problem, I would change this to a percent. The next question asks you to solve algebraically for x, so this is a radical equation, so the first thing I'm going to want to do is isolate the radical. So I'm going to subtract x, then I'll have x minus 5 with the square root 7 minus x. Now I'm going to get rid of the radical. Remember, you can only get rid of the radical as long as it's alone, so I need to get rid of that x first. This will cancel out the radical, and I'll be left with x minus 5. Remember, this is a binomial, which means it's two pieces, so you have to do box method. So 7 minus x, 7 minus x. That gets you 49, 7 times 7, minus 7x, and then x squared. So that's going to get you x squared. These will combine to negative 14x plus 49. Now remember, x squared likes to be equal to 0, so I'm going to subtract the x and add the 5 over. That'll get me 0 equals x squared minus 15x plus 54. And now I can do AM. So the factors of 54 that add to 15 are 9 and 6. We want a negative 15 though, so I'm going to make these both negative. So I'll get x equals 9 and x equals 6. Now you're going to check this. You can do it two ways. Either use your calculator and put this into y1 and that into y2 and look at the table. When you do that, you'll see that 9 doesn't work, but 6 does. Like the two columns don't match. Or you can just plug in 9 into this and you'll see that it doesn't work, because 9 minus 5 is 4 and the square root of 4 is 2, and 2 plus 9 is not 7, it's 11. But when you do 6, 6 minus 5 is 1, and the square root of 1 is 1, and 1 plus 6 is 7. So that's why we would reject 9 and we would keep 6. Now it says explain step by step how you would obtain your answer. So on the test, you're going to use words. You're going to explain that first. So I'm not going to write this because my handwriting is terrible. But first I subtracted the x to isolate the radical. Then I squared both sides to reduce the radical and release the inside. Then I box methoded the binomial over here. Then I subtracted the 5 and subtracted the x and added the 5 over because x squared likes to equal 0. Then I did AM. Then I solved for x because remember this is equal to 0. And then I checked my answers and found out that 9 was extraneous and 6 was not. So that's what you would say for part B. This question asks you to write the equation of parabola at focus, the point negative 4, 2, and the directrix is y equals 6. So first off, I always make a picture for this. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's my directrix. And my focus is at negative 4, 2. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. Okay, that means your vertex is perfectly halfway in between these two guys. So the distance between these two are 1, 2, 3, and 4. So 2 above the focus and 2 below the directrix is my vertex. So I'm going to put a vertex right here. And it opens down. So because 2 is the distance, that's my A value. And my vertex is negative 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then 1, 2, 3, 4. So negative 4, comma 4 is my vertex. So now that I have all the information I need, I can go ahead and plug into this equation. Oops, I forgot the 4a, plus or minus 4a y minus k. Okay, so I'm going to plug in the vertex. Now remember, you need to change the signs of these guys. So it's going to be x plus 4 squared equals, now it's going down, the parabola's opening down, so it's going to be negative 4 times 2 y minus 4, okay? So this guy went here, changed its sign, and this guy went there, changed its sign. My final equation will be x plus 4 squared equals negative 8 y minus 4. Oops. Y minus 4. So that is my answer. Next question says the mean and standard deviation of the distribution of nickel weights are 5. So they give you periodically the U.S. Mint checks the weight of newly minted nickels. Below is a histogram of the weights representative of 100 new nickels. So they tell me the mean and standard deviation. So the mean is right here, right in the middle, X bar. They want you to find the standard deviation that's 2 standard deviations above and below. So to get the first standard deviation, all you would do is take 5 and add 0.06. That'd get you 5.06. So that's 1 standard deviation. If you add 0.06 to that, you'll get 5.12. So that's the first value. So when you do 2 standard deviations above the mean, you're literally just adding the standard deviation twice. So it's 5 plus 0.06 plus 0.06 again. And then to find the 2 standard deviations below the mean, you're just going to subtract. So when I do 5 minus 0.06, I end up getting 4.94, which is my negative 1 standard deviation. And if you subtract the 0.06 one more time from 4.94, you end up getting 4.88. So that's my negative 2 standard deviations. So it would be 4.88. Describe the shape. We would say it is approximately normal. And it says explain. It's because it is symmetric about the mean which means that this is somewhat symmetric to that side. You can kind of fold it over like a butterfly, almost. You could say bell-shaped, you could say mound-shaped, but it looks pretty good to me to be almost normal because I can make this bell curve right here. Next question says the peak demand for water in a certain town occurs during the summer months and can be modeled by the function 1600 sine pi over 9dt plus 5,000, where WT represents the number of cubic feet of water needed for any number. T means days in this case because June has 30 days and July and August have 31. And assume that T equals 1 corresponds to June 1st. They first want you to find the period. So remember, period, the formula is 2 pi over B. But to do that, you need B. So let's look at our equation. This is A. Whatever's in front of the sine or cosine is A. Whatever's in front of the letter is B. And C is not here because we don't have a left and right shift inside the parentheses, but we do have a D value because it's outside of the whole equation being added. Anything that's added or subtracted outside is your D value. So I'm going to find my period by doing 2 pi over 90. If you divide that in your calculator, you're going to end up getting 180. Now remember, period is how long it takes to make one full cycle. So since this is a sine curve, it would take from 0 to 180 to make one full sine curve. Okay. Now the midline and the amplitude do with the height of the curve. The midline would be the middle, and then the amplitude would be how high it is above and how high it is below the midline. So your midline is always your D value. I always think midline D. There's a D in midline. So this is 5,000. Now because this is representing the height, this represents the amount of water. So I'm going to do feet cubed to label this. And the amplitude is 1,600 feet cubed. So that means that the maximum amount of water would be 6,600 because that's above the 5,000. So let me just make a little picture so you know what I'm talking about. So here's your sine curve if you were to graph it in your calculator. It would go from 0, I don't know why I did a plus sign, that was silly. It would go from 0 to 180 to make one full curve. The midline is 5,000 cubic feet. And then to get the max, you would add 1,600. And to get the min, you would get minus 1,600 from that max. Okay? So like I said, this would be 6,600. And then 5,000 minus 1,600 would be 4,400.